Hi, I'm Michelle Fakos, an internationally renowned, award-winning expert on Nordic art. I've been lecturing and writing on this topic for decades, and I'm a Swedish and also an American citizen living part-time in Stockholm. I'm excited to share with you my research, gleaned from books, journals, letters, and conversations with other experts. I know how hard it is to find out about Nordic art because I had to learn to read Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, and German to do it. Are you with me? Let's get started. National Romanticism was a Europe-wide movement whose purpose was to construct generic national identities that encouraged patriotism and social solidarity. National identity highlights the singular characteristics of a nation, the qualities that distinguish it from its neighbors. But it can also include fundamental geographical and climatic conditions or cultural elements, such as food, language, music, and religion, that, while part of one nation's experience, might also be shared by its neighbors. In Denmark, National Romanticism began almost 2 centuries earlier than elsewhere in Scandinavia. A Danish national consciousness began to arise in the mid-17th century, as evidenced by Hans Raven's complaint that it is as if we were tired of our fatherland's sweetness and have forced ourselves against our nature to embrace foreignness. We have Germanized so long that we have become half German. In 1772, Danish replaced German as Denmark's official language. In 1755, King Frederick V issued an invitation to all his subjects to submit ideas on how to improve the Danish economy. This extraordinary measure evidenced a trusting relationship between monarch and citizen that existed nowhere else in Europe at the time. The reason for the king's unusual attitude was his membership in the Freemasons, an international association that formed several decades earlier in Britain, and to which many key members of Denmark's nobility and bureaucracy belonged. Freemasonry's principles of integrity, friendship, respect, and service guided Danish government policy throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, because Denmark's most important decision makers were also Freemasons. In the 1760s, Denmark's foreign minister was German-speaking Count Johann Hartwig von Bernstorff, who never learned Danish. He encouraged Denmark's 300 largest landowners, who owned 98% of Denmark's farmland, to recognize that property ownership increased agricultural productivity more than did restrictive laws tying peasants to the land. Here we see one of von Bernstorff's properties, Jentofte, the first of 3 properties he divested, creating a total of 42 new farms. On the left side of the painting, we see the village of Jentofte with its church, and on the right, a newly created farm, accessible from a broad and recently constructed road. The village in the background is bathed in the rosy light of twilight, by which the artist suggests that it represents a vanishing way of life. Its geographical distance also suggests remoteness, a way of life that was disappearing, one where farmers lived in villages owned by the nobility. The new farm, with its crisp half-timber architecture, represented a vision of both present and future. The farmhouse and barn are large and orderly. They command the landscape from their elevated positions like a fortress. The fact that they lie in shadow alludes to their newness, their potential, like a closed flower. With the winding road, Paulison guides the viewer's gaze from left to right, from village to farm, from past to present, from inefficiency to efficiency, and from dependence to autonomy. The stand of trees that separates Jentofte village from the newly established farm functions as a metaphorical boundary between the feudal past and the future economic, political, and social improvement that will develop with the new class of free and equal farmers. This democratizing of the landscape played a crucial role in encouraging patriotism among Denmark's rural inhabitants. Following von Bernstorff's lead, other aristocrats began selling sustainable plots of land to their tenant farmers for symbolic sums. Delighted by their new independence, these farmers eagerly left their villages and built homes on their newly acquired property. C.W. Eckersberg expressed justifiable pride in this achievement in his painting of a new farm. A rainbow, symbol of hope and happiness, protects the home and barn. Beside whitewashed walls and straw roofs, a stone wall protects the kitchen garden. In the foreground, beyond the gate that prevents livestock from wandering, 2 women tend to cows, while the well-dressed farmer returns from market in the lower right corner of the painting. This agrarian reform created an entirely new social class, small, independent farmers. By 1800, they owned more than 50% of Danish land, a situation that made them stakeholders with a vested interest in the governance of their nation. The fact that urban clients purchased portraits of newly created farms such as these, which were painted by Eckerberg's teacher, the Copenhagen Academy professor Jens Juel, indicates the collective national pride in such progressive reforms. So appreciative were these new farmers of von Bernstorff's initiative that they raised money among themselves to commemorate him with an obelisk on his former property. Here we see a peaceful landscape and the harmonious relationship existing among the 3 rural social classes, identifiable here by their dress: nobility, free farmers, and tenant farmers. This democratizing agricultural reform was enthusiastically endorsed by the Danish crown, which in 1788 abolished the oppressive bonds of domicile, the law tying peasants to the land and quantifying the amount of produce they must deliver to landowners. So grateful were newly independent farmers that they commissioned and paid for a monument to the king that today stands in front of Copenhagen's central train station, built more than 100 years after the memorial was installed. The impact of this law on the development of Denmark cannot be overstated. It ended in one sweep the centuries-old tradition of differential privilege that constituted the bedrock of the feudal system. It was replaced by a doctrine of social equality that was in full force by 1800. This doctrine is the foundation of European social democracy and also of hygge, the sense of well-being that today characterizes life in the Nordic countries. This reform made Danish peasants stakeholders in the nation and fostered both pride and interest in history and heritage. When he ascended the throne in 1766, Christian VII, a schizophrenic who was deposed several years later, adopted as his motto, "Glory through love of country," a choice motivated by consensus among Danish bureaucrats and intellectuals that the nation should be investigated and documented from every imaginable perspective, and that this knowledge should be shared with the Danish public. As part of this program, the government established the Natural History Society and the Royal Academy for Science and Literature. The research produced by these organizations, together with that of the Society for National History and the Improvement of the Danish Language, founded in 1745, were published in the Danish magazine, which included scientific and historical articles, and is still published today. Its motto, "For the usefulness of many," continues to guide Danish political values. Unlike state-sponsored art academies elsewhere, Denmark's Royal Academy of Art promoted love of homeland, social and political equality, and the vision of a nation where everyone is safe and their needs are met. Thus, Academy-trained landscape painters Jürgen Sohne and Theodor Philipsen painted similar typical landscapes a half-century apart. The gentle coastal landscape with grazing cows. During the summer, Danish artists explored their country on foot to make the sketches on which they based paintings executed in their studios during the chilly, dark days of winter. Twilight, which lasts several hours in the northern latitudes, was also a popular subject with collectors, as was reading, a foundational skill for citizens of all democracies. The single most popular Danish national romantic painting is Christian Købke's View of Nørrebro from Døsringen, painted in 1838. As national romantic artists often did, Købke painted his hometown, Copenhagen. And, like them, he did it from his home, Døsringen. The lake is pink, which Danes recognize as a distinguishing feature of Nordic summer evenings. Two women stand on his dock and watch as their guests return home in the rowboat. Købke suggests that the peace, order, and tranquility reigning on this evening is typically Danish, as indicated by the Danish flag that stands at the center, bisecting the scene into two harmoniously balanced halves. The peace and stability dominating both subject and composition were created by Købke to suggest that these qualities distinguish Danish society as a whole. In the background, just above the boat, smoke drifts from a factory chimney, signaling to viewers that theirs is a modern, industrializing nation. In 1887, Laurits Andersen Ring painted a sight familiar to all Danes, rye fields. Rye, which is the grain with the highest fiber content, has been a staple of the Danish diet for centuries and is used for making both bread and beer. A few years later, his compatriot Harald Slotmøller painted a similar scene, but in a style congruent with the symbolist movement, then widespread among progressive European artists. By sculpting these amber waves of grain in low relief and then coating them with costly light-reflecting gold leaf, Slotmøller indicated that this is an imaginary scene, a Danish landscape, rather than a specific Danish location. The stylized clouds highlight the symbolic rather than actual, observed character of the field. Rye represents sustenance, the wealth of the nation, both as a dietary necessity and as an export product. A parasite devouring stork placed at the center creates symmetry as it flies reconnaissance over these precious fields. Slotmøller emphasized here the interdependence of Danes who sowed this crop with nature, thereby identifying a national landscape to which all Danes could subscribe. Maintaining an environment in which humans can coexist harmoniously with their natural surroundings is an essential element of Danish national identity and of the social democratic political system that ensures that all of its citizens thrive. National Romanticism unfolded differently and for different reasons in Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. How, you might wonder? Check out my other National Romantic videos. If you enjoyed this content, please hit the thumbs up button, and if you'd like to keep current with new videos, please subscribe to my channel. Leave comments and questions in the section below, and check out my website, www.michellefakos.com, for related articles, books, lectures, and blog posts. What would you like to learn about Scandinavian art?